Welcome to the capital plot.
The summer David Hartley nearly walked away from his allotment did not begin with a failure. It began with a forecast, a long, dry ridge of high pressure settling over Britain, the kind that turns the 10 o'clock weather into a warning. And for the first time since he picked up a trowel, David felt something close to dread, because the question hanging over his small plot that June was not whether his vegetables would grow. It was whether he could keep them alive at all. What he discovered over the weeks that followed would change the way he gardened forever, and by the end of that summer his water bill had barely moved while his neighbours' beds turned to dust. This is the story of the drought that nearly broke David and the handful of crops that quietly saved him. To understand why that summer rattled him so badly, you have to remember exactly where David had got to. 2 seasons in, he was no longer the skeptic who once stood frozen in a supermarket aisle staring at a £5 lettuce as though it had personally insulted him. He had beaten that lettuce. He had grown salad leaves right through the spring that, by his own careful sums, had paid for themselves several times over. He had planted the early crops that quietly covered the cost of his plot rent. The broad beans and the first new potatoes lifted, while the supermarket price for the very same thing climbed week on week. He had started keeping a little notebook, the way some people track a pension, and the figures in it had begun, slowly, to please him. David had begun, cautiously, to think of his soil the way a careful person thinks of a savings account. Small deposits, patient interest, no drama, no gambling. The whole appeal of it, the thing that had hooked a naturally cautious man, was that it felt safe. And then the rain stopped, and safe was the last word anyone would have used. By the second week of June, the topsoil on his plot had gone pale and crusted, cracking into little plates that lifted at the edges like old paint. The water butt that had carried him comfortably through spring dropped from full to barely a third in 9 days, and he found himself rationing it cupful by cupful, watching the level fall, and doing sums in his head he did not like. The forecast offered nothing, day after day, of the same hard blue sky. And when the council, like a good many across the country that summer, began murmuring about restrictions on hosepipes, David did the kind of maths he always did, only this time the answer frightened him. If he tried to water his way through a long drought from the mains, paying for every litre that soaked into hot ground and vanished, the cost would quietly eat every single pound his plot had earned him, and then some. The whole point of growing his own food was to spend less, not to stand there pouring money onto the soil and watching it evaporate. He worked it out one evening, and the number was so discouraging, he put the notebook away without writing it down. He stood at the edge of his beds, the light going gold and long, looking at lettuces already bolting upward into bitter, useless spikes, at courgette leaves collapsing flat by mid-afternoon, and he seriously, genuinely asked himself whether the sensible thing, the grown-up thing, was simply to let the whole summer go, cut his losses, walk away until autumn and pretend the dry months had never happened. For a man who had only just started to believe in this, it was a very low evening. He did not let it go, and the reason he did not is the reason the whole channel exists, because David did the one thing that had served him from the very first packet of seeds. He stopped guessing, and he started reading. He spent 2 evenings with a mug going cold beside him, working through everything he could find on growing in a drought. And what he learned did not just give him a technique. It completely reframed the problem. The mistake, he realized, the mistake he had been making all June, was thinking of drought as something to be fought with water, as a battle he could only win by outspending the sun. But the growers who came through dry summers intact year after year, the ones whose plots stayed green while everyone around them despaired, were almost never the ones with the biggest hosepipes or the deepest pockets. They were the ones who had chosen plants that did not need much water in the first place, and who had learned to water the few that did in a way that made every drop work twice. Drought, it turned out, was not a watering problem at all. It was a choosing problem. And that single shift in how he saw it, from spending to choosing, is the quiet hinge on which David's entire summer turned. The first thing he changed was the way he watered the plants he already had, because the science behind it genuinely surprised him. David had always done exactly what most anxious gardeners do in hot weather. A little water often, every single evening a light comforting sprinkle over the whole bed. A sprinkle that, if he was honest, settled his own nerves as much as it settled the soil. He learned that this was very nearly the worst thing he could possibly do. Frequent shallow watering trains a plant's roots to stay up near the surface, crowding into the damp top inch of soil, chasing the easy water, and that top inch is precisely the layer that bakes bone dry first and fastest the moment a real heat wave arrives. In other words, all his fussing had been raising a generation of lazy, shallow-rooted plants that were utterly dependent on him showing up with the watering can. He had been making them weak. The fix was almost exactly the opposite of his instinct. Water deeply and far less often. One long, slow, thorough soak that sinks right down through the soil teaches the roots to dive after it, to grow downward in search of the moisture held deep below, where the sun cannot reach. A plant rooted deep can ride out days of dry weather that would have a shallow one flat on its face by lunchtime. So David forced himself to stop the nightly ritual. He began watering only 2 or 3 times a week, but properly, generously, a real drink each time. He did it in the cool of early morning, so far less was stolen by the midday sun before the plant could use it, and he learned to aim the can at the base of each plant, soaking the soil where the roots were rather than showering the leaves where most of it simply evaporated. Then he did the second thing, and if there is a single habit from that whole summer that David would press into the hands of every grower watching, it is this one. He mulched. It is an unglamorous word for a small miracle. He went around the plot and covered every inch of bare, exposed soil he could find with a thick, generous blanket of whatever he had. Compost, grass clippings, straw, shredded prunings, a layer as deep as his hand is wide. The thinking was simple once he understood it. Bare soil under a hot sun is a wound. It loses its moisture to the air every hour of every day, and then it cracks and bakes hard, so that when the rain finally does come, it runs straight off instead of soaking in. A thick mulch is a lid on that wound. It shades the ground, keeps it cool, and locks the moisture in below, the way a damp cloth over a bowl stops it drying out. Within a fortnight, the difference between his covered beds and the few patches he had left bare was something he could feel with his own fingers, cool and faintly damp under the straw, hot and dusty where the soil lay open, and it had cost him almost nothing because most of it was material he would otherwise have thrown on the compost heap or carted away. But better watering and a good mulch only protected what was already in the ground. The real transformation, the part that turned a summer of damage limitation into one of his best yet, came from what David chose to grow, and the first crop he turned to was one he had walked past 100 times without a second glance. Swiss chard. To him, it had always been a slightly old-fashioned thing, a leaf your grandmother grew, with stems like stained glass in red and yellow and pink, faintly ridiculous, not serious food. What he learned changed his mind entirely. Chard sends down remarkably long, questing roots, reaching far below the parched surface to find moisture that shallow-rooted salads simply cannot touch, which makes it one of the most reliably drought-tolerant leaves a British grower can put in the ground. It will stand through heat that turns lettuce to a bolted spike. And it had a second quality that David by now prized above almost everything else because it fitted his way of thinking so perfectly. It was a cut-and-come-again crop. He did not have to harvest the whole plant and start over. He took the outer leaves, a few from each plant, and it simply carried on producing, week after week after week, from a single sowing that had cost him only a couple of pounds in seed. He sat down and worked it through, the way he worked everything through. A single short row of chard, left to crop steadily, could stand in for bag after bag of supermarket salad and spinach right across the back half of the summer. The kind of leaves that wilt within a day or two in the fridge and never ever come cheap. The seed for that whole row had cost him roughly the price of one of those bags. Everything it gave him after that first bag's worth was, in his own quiet phrase, interest on the deposit, pure return for almost no further cost. The next crop was the one that genuinely changed his summer, and the lovely thing about it was that it had been hiding in plain sight all along. In a tired corner of his plot, he had more or less written off. When David had first taken the allotment on, the previous holder had left behind a straggly, neglected patch of asparagus crowns, half buried in weeds, and David had assumed, without really looking, that they were long past saving. What he came to understand during that dry summer was that he had been ignoring something close to buried treasure. Asparagus is a perennial. You plant it once. After a couple of years to settle in and establish itself, it returns entirely on its own every single spring, year after year, with no resowing, no fuss, no annual cost. And crucially, the part that mattered so much that summer, once those crowns are mature, their root systems run so deep and so wide that an established asparagus bed simply shrugs off a drought that would flatten a tray of annual seedlings. While David fretted and rationed and watched his thirsty lettuces sulk, the asparagus in its forgotten corner did not care in the slightest. It had been quietly building that deep root system for years before David ever turned up with his trowel. So he cleared the weeds, gave the old bed a proper feed and a thick mulch to thank it, and he made a decision that summer that would go on paying him back for a decade or more. He decided he would treat the permanent, deep-rooted crops, asparagus, rhubarb, the perennial backbone of a plot, as the drought-proof foundation that everything else was built around. They ask for real attention and water only while they are young and getting established. After that, they pay him a dividend every single year for almost nothing, and they pay it in exactly the seasons when the shop price for the same fresh produce is at its most outrageous. By high summer, David had a plot that looked, to his own quiet astonishment, calmer and greener than almost any of his neighbours. While beds up and down the site yellowed and bolted and gave up, his mulched rows of chard stood glossy and upright. The old asparagus bed had thickened into a healthy green fountain, and the third crop in his new drought lineup was earning its place by the day: French beans. He had nearly not bothered with them, assuming anything that cropped so generously must be thirsty, but he had read the opposite and decided to trust it. French beans, it turned out, are surprisingly tough in a dry spell, far less demanding than the courgettes everyone on the site fussed and panicked over, the ones whose great soft leaves flop flat the moment they so much as think about going short of water. The beans, by contrast, climbed steadily up their canes through the worst of the heat, asking almost nothing of him beyond the occasional deep soak, and they did something David had come to love in a crop. They kept giving. The more he picked, the more they set, so that a single sowing turned into a steady, weeks-long harvest of beans he would otherwise have been buying by the plastic bag. He even learned to sow a second short row in early summer to follow the first, so the supply rolled on, and to freeze the gluts the way the old hands on the site did, putting summer beans away for the empty months ahead. 3 crops, then, that had quietly carried him: the chard, the asparagus, the beans, each one chosen not because it was fashionable or pretty, but because it could look after itself when the sky refused to help. He still watered, but rarely now, and always with intent, never out of anxiety. And here is the part David found almost funny, looking back on it. The drought summer, the one he had very nearly surrendered to on that low evening in June, turned out to be one of the cheapest and most productive seasons he had ever had. Because every single choice the dry weather had forced on him, the deeper watering, the heavy mulching, the tough perennials, the cut-and-come-again leaves, was, when you looked at it plainly, just good growing, wearing the costume of survival. None of it was a sacrifice. The crisis had not broken his plot. It had quietly taught his plot to look after itself. So what did that summer actually add up to in the end? David sat down in September the way he always did, with the notebook he had nearly given up on, and he worked it through as honestly as he could. And before he tells you the shape of it, he would want you to know that these are his own rough figures, the kind of estimates any grower should treat as a useful guide rather than gospel, because real results swing about with your soil, your site, and your season. They also leave out his own labour, his time, and the little water he did still use. With all that said, a few pounds of seed for the chard and the beans, a bed of inherited asparagus that cost him nothing at all but a feed and an afternoon's weeding, a whole summer's worth of mulch made very largely from his own grass clippings and compost heap, things he would otherwise have paid, in effort at least, to get rid of. That was very nearly the entire outlay. And set against it, week after week after week of leaves, beans and spears that he simply did not have to buy, right through the exact months when a long, dry summer pushes supermarket vegetable prices up and makes fresh salad leaves spoil fastest of all on the shelf. There was a neatness to it that pleased the careful part of him enormously. The drought that drove up the price of everything in the shops was the very same drought his plot had been quietly rebuilt to ignore. The worse it got out there, the better his decision looked in here. His water use, the thing that had terrified him in June, had barely risen at all, because the plants he had chosen barely asked for it. He totted it up and sat back, and for the first time all year the number was one he wanted to write down. By his own honest reckoning, In the column that mattered, the plot had not merely survived the drought. It had widened the gap between what it cost him to run and what it handed back to him, and that gap, that slowly widening margin between outlay and return, is the only number David has ever really cared about. It was, he thought, exactly what a good investment is supposed to do in a bad year. Hold its nerve and quietly pull ahead. He stood at his plot on the last genuinely warm evening of that summer, looking out over beds that had absolutely no business being so green after the year they had just lived through, and he understood that something in him had shifted for good. He would never again look at a dry forecast and feel that flicker of dread. He would look at it and think calmly that it was simply a test his plot was now built to pass. But David being David, the cautious man who can never quite leave the next problem alone, one fresh question had already begun to nag at the back of his mind. Because a plot that can feed you straight through a drought is one thing and a thoroughly good thing, but a plot that keeps on feeding you when the warmth drains out of the year altogether, when the easy growing is over, is another matter entirely. He noticed it standing there. The afternoons were beginning, almost imperceptibly, to shorten. The first properly cool nights were not far off now, and David realized, with something between curiosity and alarm, that for all he had learned, he had absolutely no idea what a small British allotment was actually supposed to produce once summer finally let go, and the cold came creeping in. That question, what on earth do you grow when the whole season turns against you, is exactly where David's story goes next. So if his drought summer has changed the way you think about your own patch of ground, follow the channel so the next chapter lands in front of you and you don't miss what he decides to plant for the cold months ahead. And the free capital plot growing calendar linked in the description below will tell you exactly what to sow and precisely when to keep your own plot earning right the way through the year. Because a plot that only feeds you in the easy months was never really an investment at all. The growers who win in the end are the ones who simply never stop growing their capital.